All right, so we are on lecture 11 in relationships, and I want to look at authority and responsibility, which is kind of just a fancy way to talk about the fifth commandment. Responsibility. I'm out of room. Authority and responsibility. So you may have guessed we obviously didn't take 11 lectures to get through, well, maybe that's not obvious in a Reformed church, but we didn't take 11 lectures to get through the first 4 commandments. But having looked in the broad scope of relationships, we then moved into the 10 commandments and saw in commandments 1 through 4 how our relationship with God is an essential and important feature of our relationship with each other. Now, after our brief hiatus last week, we're moving into more of the interpersonal relationship dynamics, beginning with parenting. So I struggled with this because, as a perpetual systematic thinker or whatever, how do you organize human relationships? Do you begin with marriage? Do you begin with parenting? Where do you begin? So I copped out and I followed God's example, and I'm going to begin with parenting because that's the next commandment. And I figured God had a method to the madness, and let's see if that emerges. There are 2 components to parenting, to parenthood, that we need to think about as we begin. And I'm using parenting in this context as the 5th commandment uses it, as the narrow archetype for all authority and responsibility-based relationships. So whether that's government and citizens, whether that's elders and church members, parenthood is being held out in the 5th commandment as representational or as archetypal for all other such relationships. And we'll get to that in a moment. First, I want us to look back at Shakespeare's play, Much Ado About Nothing. Does anyone know this play? Signor Benedict is reviewing in his head, privately, the reasons for why he should capitulate to his recently discovered feelings for Beatrice, which were started by the deceitful work of his friends who claimed that she loved him, although that was not even remotely true, as was evident. And as he begins to consider this, he goes through the list and he's thinking, well, maybe I should give up this bachelor life. Maybe I should humble myself and give up my pride, and maybe I should embrace this new life, till he comes to the great climax and he concludes, well, the world must be peopled. And there he goes. He's decided he's going to get married. This isn't quite the right vision for marriage, is it? This isn't quite the right vision for falling in love and dedicating your life one to another. And yet, Benedict is onto something, isn't he? Truly, the world must be peopled. Isn't there something in the beginning, an original impulse within humanity, that says we ought to have within the world more humans? Isn't there something fundamentally human about the desire to make humans, whether that's a biological reality or simply something that we do training-wise, that we make humans and fashion humans? Consider by contrast, January 22nd, the 46th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, in which New York State, my home state, honored that horrific Holocaust of 65 million American infants by extending the legal protections of abortion. What do you do with a civilization that no longer loves humans, that no longer wants more of them? What do we as Christians do when we live in a society that doesn't cherish the future and the recognition that we will not live forever and someone needs to take our place? Someone needs to come after us, younger than us, who will populate the world when we cannot, and who will do something here. There is an original impulse, or what we will often call in theological language, the cultural mandate, the creation mandate. God spoke to his creation and he told him, dominate the creation, populate the creation, subdue and rule over the creation. That final verb, rule, can also mean shepherd or guide, treat with kindness and bring to full fruition. Made in the image of God, humans were made for community. We've gone over this night after night. We were made to be in a relationship with God. We were made to be in a relationship with creation. We were made to be in a relationship with other humans. And part of those relationships, one sacred center of those relationships, is that first relationship, in a manner of speaking, from which we all spring. That there is a one single, isolated, and honored relationship that makes other humans. And it is a relationship endowed with authority and with power. To paint this picture a little bit, we go back to Genesis, and we see something remarkable happening in the story. God made Adam from dust. God made Eve from Adam's rib. Where has every other human since come from? Two people in marriage, in love, in this relationship. The fall, however, brought in death. Though they walked in life in the garden with God, they were separated from God. Though they enjoyed the fruit of the ground in the beautiful garden, they were cut off from the garden and driven away. An angel with a flaming sword was set at its door so that they could never return. And what is more, the curse contained antagonism and animosity toward one another. Their love and their devotion was now broken and ruined. Death reigned in their bodies and in their relationships. But do you remember, as God is pronouncing this awful curse upon humanity, he says something quite remarkable in Genesis 3:15. He says to the serpent, I will put enmity between your seed and her seed. And we now have this great language in the theology, seed of the woman, seed of the serpent. But of course, in the Hebrew, if we were just to translate the word we do often in other contexts, it would simply mean children. The Hebrew word seed is just the Hebrew word for child or children. I will put enmity between the children of the serpent and the children of the woman. You have to put yourself for a moment in the ears of Adam and Eve, who's not yet Eve, and that's the whole point. Adam and his wife. They stand there in the garden, ashamed, disgraced, and on the edge of death. And all of a sudden they hear the words, and there will be enmity between your children and his children. And they look at each other for a moment. Children? We're going to have children? I thought we were dead. And the day you eat of it, dying you shall die. You shall surely die. God, having sworn death as the curse for sin, fulfilled it. And yet in his mercy, he presents the first taste of the gospel and says to Adam and Eve, but you will have kids. You will die, but you will have kids. What was Adam's first act of faith? Adam's first profession of faith. He turned to his wife and he named her Eve, which means mom. Mother of the living. Adam, in the first human expression of faith in the gospel, turns to his wife and says, you're going to be a mom. You're going to make life. And you're going to bring humans into the world. And this act, 1 Timothy 2:15, will culminate in the salvation of the elect. That by birth, generation after generation after generation, we will at last come to that generation in which a woman will birth the Savior. Birth becomes then this essential component of God's salvation plan. God will save humanity as his first act through birth. Mary will give birth. And in that birth, in that incarnation, we have the arrival of the Savior. In this way, parenthood takes on new significance. There is a fashioning of the future, but also a rekindling of hope. What we see in Psalm 127 and 128, which I deliberately chose not to sing tonight, but is still the great Psalms of family and parenting, is that the blessing of God is upon children and the giving of children. The promise to Abraham in Genesis 15 is you'll get the land and you'll get lots of kiddos and I will be with you. And you see this promise held out again and again. And what was so wrong about raising up Hagar as a concubine? What was so wrong about marrying Leah, Rachel, and having concubines Bilhah and Zilpah? What was so wrong about David and Bathsheba? Yes, there was rape. Yes, there was adultery. But there was also the jeopardizing of the line of promise. They were bringing into conflict the promise of God. And through their false marriages, they were damaging or attempting to damage God's fulfillment of his promise. There will come a child. There will come a child. And this child will be your Savior. This is how we are to read the cornerstone or the theological foundation for parenthood, that it is an essential component of God's plan of salvation. In fact, we see it in Isaiah 49, in which God speaks to the church. And as a former church planter, it's one of those passages that we always threw around in church planting. God looks at Jesus and he says, hey, it's time to extend the tent. It's time to lengthen the cords. It's time to expand. And you all are going to look around and you're going to say, who bore me these babies? I went into the Midwest Presbytery in 2009, wanting to plant a church in Enid, Oklahoma. Little did I know that over the next 7 years, we would see God plant about 4 or 5 other ones as well. And Bruce Parnell from Stillwater, Oklahoma, and I would sit there and pray for these church plants, and we would go and visit these church plants and encourage them, and we'd sit there and look at each other and quote Isaiah. Who bore me these kids? When was I in labor? I don't remember the birth pangs. What is going on? God is adding to his church. He is building up his people and his family. And he is doing it through the authority and the responsibility of our relationships one with another. Any questions or thought on that, hopefully fairly narrow idea? God intends to build humanity, his humanity. Then let's look at the commandment itself for a moment. The commandment speaks of 3 categories of people and then a promise. Westminster calls them superiors, inferiors, and peers. These are not socially acceptable terms anymore. By superiors, he does not mean those that are better than you. He means those that have authority over you. By inferiors, Westminster does not mean you are somehow substandard. It means you are under authority. And of like manner, peers, then, are those of equal weight and authority with mutual submission. There is an expectation in the commandment that when you honor your father and mother, you recognize their supremacy over you. You act in submission to them. Likewise, in honoring your father and mother, they are recognizing their responsibility to you, to care for you, provide for you, and raise you in the fear and admonition of the Lord. Likewise, within peers, we recognize a mutuality, that there is a mutual submission one to another and a mutual exercise of authority over one another. Ultimately, the promise attached to this, Paul says it is the first promise in the commandments, is a peaceful and prosperous life. Westminster says, so long as it serves your good and God's glory. But there is something inescapable, even without Westminster's caveat, about the fact that if you honor those who are in authority, your life tends to go better. Parents, on the whole, know how not to die. And when they tell you don't do that, it might include the idea that you could die. Parents don't necessarily speak for their own well-being, though sometimes they do that. And for the most part, they speak because they recognize what it takes to have a peaceful and prosperous lifestyle. Similarly, within the church and within the civic community, those who are in authority generally exercise that authority in ways that will result in peace and prosperity. If you want to see the inverse, you can go to the book of Proverbs. And you can see time and time again in the book of Proverbs how those who act apart from parental authority, who act apart from civic authority, who act apart from ecclesiastical authority, invite trouble and strife and a short, brutish, painful life, to refer to Thomas Hobbes. There is, in fact, a necessity to know, this is a really, really important point. Our culture doesn't believe this anymore. Authority is good. The exercise of authority is good. It is for the well-being of those who are under authority. It is in their best interest. That creates the ethical burden for those in authority. That we humble ourselves and be sure to exercise authority for the well-being of those under authority. But it is also important to recognize for those under authority, submission is good. It is good for us. When we go to 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 through 17, rolling into 18, 19, and chapters 3, 1 through 7, we see Peter laying out a fuller exposition of the commandment. He says in verse 13, submit to the institutions in the world. In verse 17, he says, submit to everyone. But when he says everyone, he goes on to explain, verses 13 through 17, submit to the government. Verses 18 and 19, submit to your boss, your employer. And then chapter 3, verses 1 through 7, submit in your marriage. There is a recognition that institutions exist in human order so that we might be able to have humans learn, humans grow. There is this incredible irony that I want to come back to later. When we resist and rebel against the authorities and institutions that human societies create, we make ourselves deaf to the wisdom of the ages. We make ourselves blind to the insight of our elders. And we leave ourselves incapable of grasping the world we're in. I made as an offhanded remark this morning just this observation. It's really great spending time with grandparents. They can tell you more about who you are than you can. They know the world you have come from. They know the family that has made you better than you do yourself. There is this submission that is necessary in human relationships to become fully human. We learn to become good, mature, godly humans capable of exercising authority, first by submitting to authority. As I've often referenced, Tom and I spent a few days in Capitol Hill Baptist Church in D.C., and there was a great question from the floor to Mark Deaver. What do you do about someone who won't submit to authority? And Mark said, never put him or her in authority. Submission to authority is a necessary prerequisite for the exercise of authority. In this way, we learn to humble ourselves before we learn to help other humble people. That's the commandment in a nutshell. Any questions or thoughts about that? Yes, Tim.
Just the only time that we don't submit to the authority is if they're asking us to sin.
Correct. Yeah, so there's going to be a, how do I say it in a non-military way? Chain of command. That your authority is bound by the authority that is above you. So in the book of Ecclesiastes, if you see injustice in the land, do not fear, for there is someone watching over him, and over him is someone watching over all. There is a recognition that the authority of God trumps all lesser authority. And so with that recognition of the disparate levels of authority, Acts chapter 4, we submit to God rather than to man. Yeah, very good, Tim. Yes?
Can you elaborate a bit on what your intention was when you said that you become more fully human when you submit to authority?
Yeah, so the idea of learning how to exercise our humanity in a healthy and proper way. Not fully human in an ontological way. It's more of a Bailey in-house kind of way of speaking for training and teaching. That you're fully human from the beginning in an ontological way. Our being, our essence is all fully human. But we don't quite know how it is to be a human in the world, how to express our humanity in creation, in our relationship with God, in our relationship with each other. Humans ought not to do this. Humans ought not to do that. Humans ought to do this. And so the exercise of authority over us is an essential way to grow in our proper expressions of humanity. Good question. Okay? So then to look a little deeper at the two different relationships I wanted to highlight tonight. One is parenthood, and then moving on to a broader sense of it. Often as parents, we feel like we're building without a blueprint. Yes? That you're trying to put something together and you're not totally sure what it's supposed to look like when it's done. And you're not totally sure what the next step is or what the last step was that you just did. And you're in the middle of this thing and you're just trying to make it work. I remember, and I've told this story before in other contexts, a long night when I was in seminary that was proceeding to an early morning, so that I stumbled into the seminary exhausted and asked an older classmate who had older children, when do you get over the feeling that you're totally ruining your kid's life? He said, I don't know. I'll let you know when I get there. We have been friends for 12 years. He still hasn't told me. And when do you get to that sensation that as a parent, you know what you're doing? Generally right after you exit that era of life. It's like toddlers, I got them down. It's good now that I have none. And teens, I just don't know what's going to happen there. You know, you recognize as a parent that you don't actually know, and you're confused. But the reality is we do have a blueprint. We have a blueprint in the parents that are around us. We have a blueprint in the parents that have gone before us. And of course, we have a blueprint in the scriptures themselves. That the Word of God speaks in numerous ways and places and times about the formation of humans into godly humans. So in this way, parents ultimately are cooperative contributors to another person's formation. And this is why the fifth commandment stands as a sample of all the authoritative relationships. That it is the business of those who are in authority, be them elders, governors, or parents, to contribute to the healthy formation of other humans. Our goal is to see people thrive and grow in goodness and godliness. Within parenting, we see two different roles. We see a father, which starts with an F, not a P, whose primary function within the scriptures is articulated as begetting and inheriting, going two different directions with those. By begetting, we mean acquiring children. Fathers throughout the scriptures and in the ancient world at large were always in search of sons. Let me illustrate it with one example. There was God. He was in eternity. He didn't need anything. He didn't want anything. He didn't lack anything. So he made this giant cosmos so that he could have a son. Fathers are in search of sons. They are acquiring for themselves sons. Why do I specify sons? Because the ancient world hated daughters? No. Because the understanding was you acquired sons in the next generation because you needed an heir. You needed inheritance. And the scandalous understanding of Paul's treatment of adoption in the New Testament is that daughters are heirs with sons. Though all the ancient world would have been scandalized by the idea, the Apostle Paul clearly teaches that we all, each one, are co-heirs with Christ. And fathers are responsible to exercise this oversight of gathering children and giving them a place in the world. Psalm 45, verse 16. and in your Father's place your children will stand. There is this recognition that fathers go. I don't know if it's been recorded, but Bruce Martin preached a great sermon on that verse at Presbytery. It probably wasn't recorded, so here's the little snippet. Fathers don't last forever. So you need to have sons and daughters. Children that you love, raise, and rear, and you don't have to birth them or beget them. Sometimes you just have to love them. It is universally true that as humans age, we must embrace the responsibility to be fathers. That is, those who help other humans find their place in the world, who leave to them an inheritance, a claim, a spot that says, this is my own, this is where I belong. God built a world and gave it to his kids. He prepared a place for them to occupy and steward on his behalf. This is the model for fathers. We are here to carve a niche in the world for someone else, not ourselves. There is, not surprisingly, as we've discussed many times, at the bottom of this relationship, self-sacrifice. But then there is also mother. Mother is like it, represented in the scriptures primarily as birthing and nurturing. That is the making and the caring of children. 1 Corinthians 11:12. We recognize that this one also comes from God. God makes life. He is the one who saves life through childbearing. And then in the clinching verse, Isaiah 66, verse 13, God says, like a mother who takes a crying infant upon her knee and bounces it and holds it, I will take you upon my knee and comfort you, my people Israel. God promises to be like a mother hen in Psalm 91, 2. Not 1, I think it is. Yeah, 91, thank you. Psalm 91. That's what happens when I leave my notes. And he says, I will gather you. Jesus, coming into Jerusalem, said the same, just not in Luke's gospel. That I will gather you as a mother hen gathers her chicks. This is the desire of God, to gather people to himself. It is the desire of mothers to gather the children near. This is a remarkable thing. My parents are coming up on their 40th anniversary. So all the boys, faithful and otherwise, contacted them and said, all my parents had were boys. So we contacted her and said, Mom, Dad, what do you want for your 40th anniversary? Should we send you on the cruise? Shall we do this, that, or the other thing? Her boys all grew up to have some money and can help. And then she said, I'm tempted to ask you to guess. No, I just want all my sons in one place with me. This is her desire. What do moms want? Yeah, exactly. To have their family about them, their children upon their knee. There is this desire to comfort, this urge to nurture within motherhood. And there is a recognition that this extends beyond mere femininity, just as fatherhood would extend beyond mere masculinity. Biologically, these are limited, of course. But there is a call for us to exercise authority in a loving way. Let me give you an example. The Apostle Paul says that when we elders and apostles were among you, we were as gentle as nursing mothers. There is a call for all humans who are in authority to exercise their authority like a father for the good and the building up of their children. And there is a call for all people who are in authority to exercise that authority like mothers with a gentle, nurturing touch. There is a responsibility to care for those under our authority. There's also then an equality and a mutuality to those offices. Notice the commandment says, honor your father and your mother. There is no strict bifurcation between these things. Mom is not outranked by dad, however that may be treated in the home sometimes. There is an equality in those offices as they express themselves in their relationship to their children. Honor father and mother. There is this need to see the mutuality of these two sides. There must be strength in fatherhood, gentleness and motherhood, and vice versa. Fathers are to be nurturing and gentle as well. Parents must conduct themselves for the well-being of their children, but not parents alone, all who are in authority. Any questions on that? Or any thoughts on that section? So then we come to the Ephesians 6 moment. You guys know what happens when you read through Ephesians 6? You know? Children, submit to your parents. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. And the children cheer. And there's this understanding that we're bound to the different side of the line that we are on. Children are submissive recipients of others' mentoring and care, right? Children, that was perfect, absolutely perfect, thank you. Children are those who are receiving constantly. We are conceived as a bundle of mirror neurons. So this is this great little thing that I learned in my vast, expansive reading in preparation for this study. When we're born, our brain is a mass and mush of mirror neurons, not properly, thoroughly formed thinking processes, but just copycat things. And babies have this incessant impulse to copy everything they see, hear, smell, taste, touch, whatever. We're born in this rough dynamic, what David Brooks called half Cupid, half Stormtrooper, in which there is this wooing of mommy and daddy's heart, and then the assaulting of it with cries and screams and all sorts of dread terrors. Humans begin in this bundle of expectations and needs. And there must be someone willing to love them more than themselves. These are what we call parents. Those who love you more than they love themselves. Those who are willing to lay down their lives and, in fact, literally, but on a day-by-day and sometimes imperceptible way, do. Your mommy doesn't go back together. And your parents will never recover from having birthed you, made you, and raised you. They have given their lives and their health and their wealth and well-being to it with joy and would do it again and again. This is what children must grasp about the mentoring experience, that the ones who exercise authority over them, who expect submission from them, are those who love them most and love them best. And the exercise of authority is good, healthy, and loving. To do this, children need to exist. And again, I want to keep hitting this. When I say children, I mean anyone under authority. Need to exist in an environment that is life-giving and human-forming and fashioning. There is this weird little law in Exodus 23:19 and 34:26. You guys remember this little law? Do not boil the baby goat in the mother's milk. And we all go, what? Do not use instruments of life for death. You do not employ the milk of a mother, which is meant to give life, as a way to destroy life. We need to cultivate homes that are life-giving as parents. Children need to recognize they were brought into the world with gratitude and with joy. And parents need to communicate this sense of warmth and love. There is to be this spilling out of, I rejoice in life and I rejoice in your life and I want you in my world. There is to be this warm welcome, this establishing of a thing we call a home. This is recognized in even our language if we extend it beyond the family. If we speak of the nation, what is the old archaic words for nation? If you go into almost any other country other than like English, what do they call their nation? Their fatherland, their motherland. There is a recognition of a familial character, that this is the place of my belonging. Children need to have this sense and have it impressed upon them from those in authority. You belong here. This is yours. This is something so important in our infant baptism if we switch to the church relationship. We as elders need to communicate to our children, this is your church. When we have a prayer meeting, you're welcome to pray. And when we have the sacrament of the baptism, you get wet too. We have this embrace of you are children of the church and the church is yours. Jesus said, not that they belonged to the kingdom, but that the kingdom belonged to them. You are the future owners of this church, such as it is. And you take our place. In this way, home communicates a warm and real welcome. Laban embraced Jacob in Genesis 29 with a phrase you might recognize. You are flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. Where did we hear that before? A little earlier in Genesis. In the garden, there was this sleepy guy. He woke up, he rubbed his eyes. He saw a creature he hadn't seen before. And Adam exclaimed, you are woman. You are flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. Laban takes that same phrase and he sees his sister's son and he says, you are flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. You are family. You are family, even as Eve was family to Adam. You belong. There's a warmth and a welcome, what Christopher Lash called a haven in a heartless world. Home, a place of shelter, comfort, and warmth. We need to build this up in our churches, in our nation, in our homes themselves. But also then rich provision. Children will need to thrive in the rich provision of a home. The excellent wife in Proverbs 31, much has done with it. I'll drop one little, piece for it. Go check out Daniel Howe's lecture at White Lake from a couple of years back on Proverbs 31. He compares it to the church, who is the excellent wife. I thought that was really good and liberated a lot of women from undue stress. There is this understanding that a home should be full of provision and kindness, a warmth and a love. Children need this environment of affection and care where needs are met. To put it in another way, the human race is not impressive because of the towering geniuses which have produced individual masterpieces. Rather, the human race is impressive because groups of people have created mental scaffolds to guide future thought. Humans are impressive, says David Brooks, because in Psalm 102, we have things written for the sake of those alive in future days. As humans, we have figured out how to project traditions and ethics into the future, long after we are gone. What Tolkien has called the gift of humanity, generation or regeneration, that we as individuals pass with the telling, said Bilbo, but the human race endures because we have these institutions by which we establish the future, by which we raise up the children who will come after us, and we see with joy the grandchildren that come. Those children must thrive in this environment of warmth, welcome, of love and life-giving joy. But that's not all, but that's where I'll stop for now. Any thoughts on that section? Okay. Let's shift gears a little bit then to the idea of mentors. The idea of mentors is a critically important one. It's essentially within our theology the idea of an adopted parent, that you willingly take on the role of assisting a fellow human in formation. This is commanded in Scripture. Older women are to train the younger women. Titus 2, 1 Timothy 5. The apostles referred to themselves, as I already referenced, 1 Thessalonians 2:7, as gentle and as nurturing, coming alongside others. Timothy was of such blessing to those churches under Paul because of the care and mentoring of his mom and grandma, Eunice and Lois. There's an understanding that there's a responsibility as humans, whether we have begotten or birthed the children, to have within our care and under our authority fellow humans. How many of you have ever had a mentor? How many of you still have one? Don't give them up. And when one goes away, find another one. I find it remarkable looking back. Like most American males, I have assumed that I am the master of my destiny and the captain of my fate. And now as I age a little bit, I know I'm young. As I age a little bit, I look back and I recognize with shock, my whole life is just a series of chapters in which I have been handed from one mentor to the next, in which I have just moved from the care and oversight of one godly man to another. And this is a critically important part of our formation, that we recognize we will never graduate from the fifth commandment. There was a wonderful moment in which a friend of mine was caring for his aging parents, and they were having a discussion about what to do, which can be very difficult. And in this difficult discussion, my friend said to his parents, "Well, look, you just need to do this." And his wonderful godly parents, his father, smiled at him sweetly. So the fifth commandment is still in effect. There's an honoring of parents and those in authority that never goes away. And that those who have come to exercise authority, who have entered into offices of authority, must recognize we too must conduct ourselves with humility. We must humble ourselves. There was a missionary I knew in China, Walt DeMoss, still know him. And I can say his name on the recording because he's not in China anymore. And Walt made the observation, one thing that is so difficult about missionaries' kids embracing the gospel, nobody else says what you're saying. The children grow up in a culture in which no one reinforces the theological beliefs of the parents. This is a great burden and expectation for us in the church. My children need other Christian adults to agree with my teaching and preaching, and so do yours. We need mentors outside the home. We need mentors within the church body to visit one with another, to pray one with another, to study one with another, to come alongside and say, your parents are not altogether crazy. They have some things right. To come alongside and say, yes, let's reinforce what the parents have done. The Puritans saw this insight as well and maybe took it a little too far. At 12 and 13, you were thrown out of the home and left in somebody else's. There was this great shuffling of preteens in the Puritan culture in which all the preteens would move to a different house so that somebody else could deal with your teenage issues. There was this understanding that within the community of faith, we exercise together the oversight and care that is necessary to fully fashion our community in faith. The relationship that has authority requires humility. It also requires mutuality. It requires cooperation, that we together alone can reinforce the authorities and their wisdom and insights and humility. Parents' perspectives need to be upheld, and mentors can do that. Some practical considerations then. Growing out, so this would have been mentors if I was doing my outline. A couple practical considerations then. Parenting is hard enough, and there must be a recognition that as parents we work hard, but at the end of the day, it's by grace. I don't remember where I first picked it up, But there were a lot of godly parents who have come before me, who have taught me, who have trained me. And one of them said to me, my children turned out all right, in spite of my best efforts. There's a recognition of humility in authority, that I am not fit or equipped. There's a great moment for me as a preacher. It's about 15 minutes before the worship starts. I don't know if Tim and Tom get to enjoy that moment of angst as we stand back here in the fellowship hall and my brain's not fully functioning. My emotions are. And I'm sitting there and I hear these brothers pray for me and they say things like, we thank you for his preparation and his wisdom and his readiness to preach. And I just swallow hard. And I know I'm not worthy of this office. And I know that it is the grace of God that's going to make a good sermon, not me. Parents, we need to understand we're not good enough. We need to understand that the exercise of authority is something far beyond our skill and wisdom. Again, to return to Gandalf, he said, the wisest cannot see all ends. We do not exercise omniscience in our authority. What matters more is stable and predictable rhythms. What matters more is this environment of grace and discipline. What was I going to write? Rhythms. My mouth keeps going and my hand can't keep up. Creating an atmosphere in which we build this warmth and this discipline together. There is a recognition that disciplining your children costs something. I'm already getting into it, so I might as well write it down. Disciplining your children must cost you something, and it costs them something. I remember as a child hearing other parents say, this will hurt me more than it hurts you. My parents never said that. And there's this recognition that there is a hurt, but they are of not like kind. The parent who is exercising discipline is deeply wounded. No parent enjoys inflicting pain on their children. But the pain is inflicted from love and from devotion, from a deep desire. It was observed in studies on parenting that severity is less an indicator than stability and predictability. Justice matters in discipline. That as parents, we bring a brokenheartedness. Don't discipline in anger. Don't discipline in selfishness. Discipline in tears, in weakness, and in humility. Recognizing and owning that as a parent, as a mentor, you have contributed to the problems you must now punish. There is nothing as horrifying or humiliating as disciplining a child for the crime you gave them from your own disposition. There is few things as humbling as exercising authority, as exercising love and care and discipline, and then stepping back and saying, what have I done? But then to recognize in that humility, to recognize the hope with which we began, that God has said the exercise of authority is good. God has said that the care of those who are dependent and needy, those who are growing, is good. And He will favor it. He will bring about peace. When we enter into discipline, we must recognize that our exercise of authority and discipline is got at its aim personal restoration and the transformation of the human in front of us. We do not punish merely to change behavior. Paul David Tripp put it this way, shepherd the child's heart. That we are to win the heart of the child. That we are to win it with love and affection and care, with stability, by providing that atmosphere and that environment that says, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to take care of you and it's going to be all right. And even if I hurt you, it's because I love you. This is what discipline needs, is this environment and this outlook. To get very practical then in this way, try and pull this down to ground level a little bit. When you exercise your authority, exercise it under God's authority. In a very practical way, when you discipline with the word of God on your lips. This is the commandment you have broken. This is what God has asked you to do, and you have not done it. Therefore, I must do this, so that you learn to love the law of God, so that you learn to love those in authority over you. We must win with love, or we cannot win at all. This is the profound irony and deep sense of humility necessary for exercising authority. Authority, naked, is tyranny. It must be exercised in love. Authority needs to be sheathed in the true care and concern for those under authority. This is how we win submission, not by booming voices, heavy hands. Those may be part of the process, but they must be unleashed in love. It must still be love. Any thoughts or questions on that? Yes, Chris.
Maybe I missed you saying this, but I think what you're talking about is, in a broad sense, nurture.
Mm-hmm.
It covers the discipline, it covers the teaching, the physical provision. I think it's wonderful. Looking back, what I remember about my home was nurture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a need for the home to have that nurturing, warm environment for discipline to be effective. That reminds me, by the way, that we also need to see a more expansive view of what discipline is. So in the academic field, is discipline a good thing or a bad thing? What is your discipline? In sports, is discipline a good thing or a bad thing? In the military, is discipline a good thing or a bad thing? Why is it that the only place we think discipline is a bad thing seems to be the family or the church? Now, we need to recognize this, as Chris was saying, this more expansive view of the relationship. Discipline includes counsel, correction, encouragement. Discipline includes building up the person in constructive and healthy ways. Parenting needs to embrace both this very warm, affectionate approach and this very severe and fatherly approach, motherly approach, this balance. Yes, Tim.
The fifth commandment is the only commandment in the second table that has a promise that goes with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's, we talked about it a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Do you think that that is significant? And I think part of my question is thinking about like the Proverbs. Proverbs talk a lot about being teachable.
Yes.
And the one that rebels is a fool. And is there just sort of, is there wisdom wrapped up in, you know, hey, if you keep this commandment, there's a lot of practical benefit in your life that you're going to enjoy, maybe compared to other commandments.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That in a lot of ways, if we were to like really reduce the commandment down, that's it. Authority is good. The exercise of authority is good when exercised in love. That the one who has the authority must exercise it for the good and well-being of those under authority. And that likewise, those who are under authority, when they submit to it, they receive good. And yeah, Proverbs is just loaded with this understanding. My son, give me your heart. It's not, Romans, lend me your ears. It's, my son, give me your heart. My son, love my teaching. Take the teaching of your dad, the teaching of your mom, bind it around your neck, wear it in your chest, carry it in your hands. This recognition that there is a good life to be had when we learn to submit to good authority and learn the love of those who are over us and their interest in our well-being, when we presume the best of them. Yeah, very good.
I think our culture, it's very natural to challenge authority. And there are times to do that, I think, in the workplace and things like that, but it seems like, at least in the workplace where I find myself, the default seems to sort of be to question or to challenge or to complain or resist. So
We have a couple generations in America now where the motto has been challenge authority. Yes, Patrick.
Yeah, with the mentorship and the kind of authority and modeling things, I think it's a very important area because, now, folks can find information online, but that can also be something that someone's not receiving real good mentorship and how to be a Christian and other things. There's so many other people that would be willing to have that sort of influence, for bad or for good.
Yeah, if you want to hear a little bit more about a good mentoring program, talk to Patrick about what's going on in Indianapolis. I think it's very good on several levels. One, we're facing a culture where, I'm talking to us in the safety of this room, but how many kids in Cambridge are going home to tyrannical authority that's devoid of love? And how are we as a church going to adjust that? This idea of mentoring, this idea of becoming a family for those whose families are broken, is a critically important part of evangelism and care of the lost and the needy. That we need to provide that kind of loving lifestyle modeling to come along beside them, to sit with them, to weep with them, to hold their hand, and to actually exercise authority in gentle and loving ways, and not be surprised if you get bit a few times. And it's going to hurt. But to recognize there's something in that self-sacrificing exercise of authority for one's good that we need to exercise outside of just the biological. It's one thing I hope I've worked through here well is seeing the biological as sort of that first and archetypal, but we've got to extend it into our other relationships as well. The mimicry is there. Thea has such an advantage over me. She can copy her parents in her sleep. It just comes natural, Hope as well, right? Yeah. But for me, it's just like, I need somebody to come alongside and actually be like, no, do it this way. It's like, oh, okay, sorry. I need a mentor. Yes, Chris. Mm-hmm.
The church is an ordinance of redemption
Mm-hmm.
because of the fall. Marriage is so foundational in the as I think about where I want to put my efforts in terms of mentoring, is in trying to help marriage itself.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, I was puzzled for years by my grandfather was pastor. And someone was describing to him a difficult situation, a social situation. His remark was, "It's not as bad as a bad marriage." But marriage is so foundational, nurture, and I've turned that over in my mind, and I think, yeah, you're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to dive into marriage more directly under the seventh commandment. So coming up, in some ways, it feels kind of out of order. On the other hand, it's interesting, some of the books I read, they actually took parenting before marriage from the standpoint of a kid, because actually the first relationship we encounter as humans is our parents. And we learn marriage later in life. It is important to cultivate these healthy relationships in and around the church. And marriage doesn't come natural, does it? It's a lot of work. Parenting doesn't come easy. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time I spend talking with parents who are just like, should I do this or should I do that? And it's like, there's no easy way to do it. It's not going to be easy no matter what you do. And so we need to care for each other and we need to help each other. Okay? All right, so we have definitely used up our hour. Thank you. Let's close with Psalm 102, selection C. Psalm 102, selection C. The psalmist says, "Let this be written for the sake of those alive in future days, so that people he has yet to make will to the Lord lift up their praise." We need the multi-generational view of what we are doing, that we are not here for ourselves or for this short time, but that we anticipate God sustaining the human race and bringing up a church in the future. And we see there his salvation being celebrated and proclaimed in the church for generations yet to come. Psalm 102C, before we sing that, let me close us in prayer. Our Father in heaven, we give you thanks that you are our Father, that we are not aliens or strangers, we are not orphans and wanderers. We are children of the living God, having found a family, having found a Father who loves us and cares for us. Father, forgive us for how far short of your glory we so continually fall as we exercise our authority in this world. Father, have mercy on us, that we might learn to walk in your ways, exercising authority with wisdom, with grace, with humility, submitting to authority likewise with grace, humility, and wisdom, that we might see in the church and in the home, that we might see in this nation the goodness of life that is found only when those who are in authority act in love, and when those who are under authority likewise act in love. Our Father, be with us tonight. Give us safe travels and deep, peaceful sleep. Awake us rested and refreshed and ready for the week ahead. For this grace we ask from you, in the name of Jesus Christ and for his glory. Amen.